I think the bar was recording. The Bargo, have you started recording?
Yes, yes.
Ha, great. No worries. I'll just start real quick again. Hello everyone. Welcome to session 2 of our workshop series. We're going to go ahead and explain something very important to you, that is motion types and motion burdens. So when you go ahead and you debate, right, you get a set of motions as we already explained to you in the last sessions. You get three motions, right, which you then go ahead and rank, and you get one particular motion, then you go ahead and debate on. So these motions are of different types, which means they are phrased in different ways, and every single phrasing has certain burdens that it carries. And if you fulfill those burdens, then you're inherently able to win debates in an easier way. These are the different kinds of motions that we're going to cover today. This house believes that, or THBT. Is I3 here? Hello, I3, are you here? Smith, can you please check and tell me if I3 is here?
No, I isn't.
Cool, no worries. I'll just go ahead then. This house believes that, or THBT, this is one of the most basic motions that you will get. So, what happens if you have THBT in itself? You're basically asking the house or asking the judge to go ahead and evaluate the debate that happens based on principle, based on a belief system that you then go ahead and create, which means this is a value judgment debate. You judge if there is some truth to the sentiment, and the truth that is then occurring, whether it's actually going ahead and giving you some sort of a benefit, or if you're able to go ahead and compare the harms versus benefits, or at least the value judgment in itself. It's a pretty straight line motion, which means you don't really need to go ahead and design any kind of policy. You don't have to design any kind of model, etc. You simply debate on the truth of the sentiment. This can happen based on principles, whether it's principally correct, whether it's morally correct, and then you go ahead and define if this is principally okay to do. But also, secondly, on pragmatics. Does the pragmatic effect or the logical effect that you're talking about actually create some sort of benefit, whether it be in the society or whether it be to particular stakeholders that are there in the debate, right? Right. So the aim of the debate is to basically change how the audience thinks, which means the job of the government is to go ahead and ensure that there is some truth that they can associate with the sentiment, and you go ahead and show why this belief is right. And if you prove that it is better than whatever the opposition is talking about, you inherently win the debate. I think how do you do that? You go ahead and you use impacts. Impacting can be different ways. It can be the impact of solution, which means you have more solvency on your side of the world, you have more social traction on your side of the world, you probably have more justice on your side of the world, etc., etc. That's entirely up to you to go ahead and frame and use in the debate according to the different arguments that then you go ahead and introduce. I think then what is the job of the opposition? The opposition needs to go and show why the truth of the statement is a not relevant, but also b is something that is harming society in a way. Which means if I say something like THBT, which is this house believes that education should be banned, then government needs to come and tell me why the banning of education, or education itself not being present or not happening is something that's creating some sort of a benefit. But opposition will then have to come and tell me why exactly education existing creating more benefit, or why is it some truth that is involved to the statement itself. You'll understand that more as in when we continue with the session itself. So basically, you're going ahead and talking about belief systems. You're inherently judging the truth value that is present in every single motion. THW, Debargo, you can take over.
Hi everyone, Devar के other side, ठीक है? Okay, so what we understand, as Alithia told you, there are different sets of motion. There are actor motions, there are policy motions, there are value judgment motions. This will be later on briefed to you all about how these motions actually look like. But just general motion burdens, how they are. This motion, this house would falls under the thing like policy motion. So what do we understand by that? Simple. We need to understand that the this entire thing that the government and the opposition both has different burdens in this for this very motion. This house vote is signifying something that we have to provide as a government. We have to simply go and provide a feasible policy. That means which there is a status quo issue that is there in the current scenario. Probably, I would say for a motion, just pick up a random motion that this house would ban cheesecake. So that means I have, as the government, my first burden is to go and show what are the harms that cheesecake is causing in the status quo, and then I have to show why I need to ban this. Because these are the harms created by it, and I have to cater a solvency to the issue in the very first place. Yeah, I can just go and say that yeah, cheesecake is being addictive. People are too much into cheesecake, diabetes increasing, and yada yada things. That's simple. That is where my responsibility as a government is to come with a feasible policy that yeah, instead of cheesecake we can just push an alternative food for the people, like we can push like healthy tiramisu or like some sort of healthy other alternatives that is replacing cheesecake in the very first hand, right? That means there is something, a concept of like fiat is coming. What do we understand by fiat? Simple. That means for only the purpose of the debate and only for this motion, like this house would, we would like just accepting that whatever the government is proposing in the very first hand, like this policy, the government is automatically having all the sorts of legal authority or like administrative machinery thingy that yeah, whatever we go and push as a policy, it has to be successfully implemented, like just as the policy is proposed, right? That means in these very motions, your first burden is to like probably give a policy as a government and show the harms that are being caused by the more cheesecake in the very first hand and why you're banning it. Can you just pass to then move to the next slide? Uh, yeah, cool. Uh, Now, as I said, you have to tell me what are the harms and all stuff. Now, the government has to come and tell you that why this policy will be more feasible and how it is making better in the very first instance the status quo issues, right? That means we have to show that it is creating greater benefits than the harms being compared to the status quo. Now, people are less addictive towards like cheesecake or any sort of desserts, right? That means people are less falling in the trap of less or like diabetes and stuff, right? That means people are now having less sugar cravings and all. So these harms are being created by my policy that I pushed in the very first place. So what is the burden? This was entirely about government's burden, right? Now, what do we understand when opposition's burdens look like? We have clearly seen that government has given a feasible policy and they have told you how this mechanism of this policy is going to be implemented and stuff. Now, opposition must come and tell me why the policy should not be adopted in the very first place, right? That means the opposition can come and tell me that yeah, banning cheesecake and start just bringing up some random alternative to it might create certain harms. That means the people, the cheesecake shops are going to face severe losses and stuff. That means the people who were addicted, they will be facing withdrawal syndromes and stuff for cheesecakes, right? That means it will be as my opposition, my first responsibility will be just counterfact whatever the policy was. Simple, right? That means I will be highlighting the harms, the risk, and the consequences which might be unintended or not catered by government in the very first place, right? Just in simple words, I have to just prove their policy as a bullshit, and I have to just go and show, yeah, whatever the government is doing is nothing. This house would, and my burden simply turns like this house would not ban cheesecake as the opposition. Simple, right? That means I am defending the status quo in the very first place. That means probably like, yeah, I have to support why cheesecake is better now. I have to show that, yeah, in my world, like cheesecake is so better that people are having better mood after eating cheesecake. People are like still happy, getting better mental health and stuff after eating cheesecake in the very first. That means as we have to also keep in mind certain things. We can just after counterfacting, giving a counterfact to whatever this thing is given, policy given by government, or opposition can propose an alternative. That means the opposition can come up and say, we would not ban cheesecake, but we can limit the consumption of a person's cheesecake. That means the one person can buy only one cheesecake a day. Simple. That means I'm catering to the solvency, catering to the status quo also that a person who wants cheesecake is getting cheesecake, but in limited quantity. Simple. That means the entire policy is resulting is in a net neutral outcome. It is neither negative nor positive in the very first sense. Simple. That means also we have to keep certain things in mind while we just flesh out what this THW motions like. Not every THW motion requires some sort of like policy and all, right? We have to understand how this functions in the very first place, which will be given explained to you in further sessions, right? Any doubts will be you can just ask me after we finish the briefings, right? Thank you so much, Alithya. I guess the next one is also mine. Cool. Yeah, cool. We need again THBT X should or would. Simple. This is a mixture of like two motion types in the first pair. That is value judgment and as well as an actor motion and as well as like some sort of like policy motion. We get different things in together on the same plate. How do we cater for this? That means the motions which like having this, you might come up with this house believes that X should do yeah, XYZ thing, are like whether or not the statement is true from the perspective of a neutral observer. That means you first debrief the motion as a someone who does not care about which side you are. Again, for this motion, government has the fiat. Simple. That means we can go and present a model in the very first place. Again, opposition can come up and give a counterfact to my whatever model I'm presenting. And that is on up to the opposition. That means it's not mandatory. Right. So I will just tell you quickly why this thing is happening. Simple. That you have to do value judgment A. B, you have to prove me why the actor, that is X, should be doing whatever it is proposed in the motion, right? That opposition cannot question in the first place that if policy would be implemented or yeah, it's up to the government, right? Alithya, can you just move to the next slide? Yeah, cool. Good motion. THBT, the US should ban gun ownership. First, we have to identify the keywords in the motion. We have to figure out who is the actor, who is the one getting affected in the motion, like as mentioned in the previous session about the stakeholders and all. Who are the stakeholders that are being directly impacted, right? Firstly, we have to figure out who is the actor here. The U.S. government. That means the U.S. government is being actor, and whatever the decision U.S. government is taking, they are up to it, right? Simple. Just go as a government when you start your speech as a first speaker, you just go and define what gun ownership looks like. Probably you can just go and say that, yeah, gun ownership is like probably a civilian is possessing any sort of firearms, including some sort of like 9 gun or like semi-automatic weapons or the stuff, right? That means you have to just go and show what is the status gun ownership looks like in the status quo. It's simple. You just define the status quo like, yeah, the US government is currently allowing all the civilians gun ownership, and that is making guns being easily accessible with like people like having uneven background sort of things, like illegal also thingy is also existing, right? That means you have to define what are the problems being generated as a consequence. That is means what is this a civilian owning a gun is creating a nuisance in the for the US government and the stakeholders. That means the people. Simple. Just we have to show that there are high rates of like gun violences in the status quo. That means there can be probably easy access to this very gun is escalating every day. Some sort of like conflicts are easily becoming into some lethal outcomes. That means there is constant public fear in the minds of people. Like public spaces are being more affected in the very first place, right? So these are the harms that US government does not want to be happen, and that is why the entire debate is happening. The motion is running on. So that means you have shown the harms now, like consequences of a civilian owning a gun. Now we have to show what this ban would look like. Like how does it function? Just go and push a policy like you just go and say that the US government is banning civilian gun ownership like through like we are just prohibiting like sale and manufacturing like civilian firearms in the very first hand, right? That means we have to give strict penalties. We're imposing strict penalties for like illegal possession and stuff. We have the government is keeping a constant check on who is owning any sort of like things. That means it reduces certain things. Like I'll just tell you the mechanism. You have to just go and tell the mechanism in the very first hand that why, what is now these how these policy is being solving the issues that those were being addressed in like point two, like what are the problems that were being generated after owning a civilian or civilian owning a gun. That means how does it remove the problems in the mentioned in point 2. And when you define this removal of the problem, it becomes your mechanism of your policy, right? Simple. Now you care about like banning of gun ownership, but also why is it important to the US? Now you have to incentivize the actor. Yo, simple. Now the how the actor is getting benefited out of this banning gun and stuff. Simple. You need to understand that the crime rates have been falling. Simple. Now the people are now having a better trust towards government that yeah, nobody is now around me owning a gun. That means the government is making sure about that. Simple, right? That means how it is affecting all the stakeholders in the entire motion. Stakeholders in the sense again will be debriefed in the further sessions. So like there are primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, how each individual stakeholders are being affected. That means you debate around the merits and demerits of banning gun ownership. That means like it is proving you have to as the government you just prove that how this entirely policy you have pushing, how the mechanism is functioning and how it is impacting and how you are solving the probably the issues that are being caused by a civilian owning a gun and how this your policies incentivizing the US government in the very first hand, right? Uh, are there any slides after this? If not, I will just quickly sum up the opposition burden for this motion. Oh no.
Right, just sum it up and like take questions as well.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Just go. Can you just go to the previous slide once? Cool. I'll just quickly, I told you the government POV, like why US government should ban and stuff, incentive of US government to ban. Now, quickly, I will define you what the opposition ground will be looking like. Opposition can simply counter prop the policy that was given by US government as an actor that yeah, people are still having the self defense or deterrence in the very first hand, right? That means it is still this gun ownership was like some sort of constitutional right for people in US. So yeah, it is protected by the amendments, right? In US, if you see, you have to be having a like some basic spec knowledge to revolve around these actors to make your constructors and arguments more better. That means you know now that US government has some sort certain amendments which are like protecting people's like owning guns and stuff, right? That means now you have to prove as the opposition why illegal markets and enforcement is failing and stuff. Like you have to prove just why rural areas and cultural dependence on guns looks like and stuff, right? That's where you have to go and you have to prove why US government should not ban gun ownership, and you have to do it in some sort that you have to prove why stakeholders are getting benefited and as well as the US government is incentivized, right? uh, okay, that's all for this. It will be further debriefed in certain sessions. Any questions for regarding the both emotions? Yeah, Bhavya, go ahead.
So in this house would
Hmm.
the PR with Gov is that they have all the resources and authority to actually pass the policy.
Yep.
So see, this is a new concept, right? So does the op also have some sort of a very basic understanding that they don't really have to prove during the debate, or
Oh, cool. See, the thing is, you need to understand the concept of fiat first. It is only an unique power that only the government has because the government is in power, right? The government can pass any law up to it depending on like just I can go and as the government I can just go and tell you all tell my people that yeah from tomorrow there will be no cheesecake in my country and I have a fiat that I hold that power in my hands that yeah I can do it. I have that legal authority to do it. So opposition just do not have this fiat in the very first place. They cannot give their own sort of policy, but they can counter what policies the government I'm pushing, right? Uh, I hope that caters to your doubt.
right? So fiat is only with the gov,
Yep.
but burdens are both on
Uh,
op and gov, right?
yep. Yep.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Right. I think additional understanding of fiat it's that fiat basically means you cannot question the feasibility of whatever policy that is being given. which means that you can probably question how that policy is going to impact people, or after implementing it, how is it going to look like, what is it going to affect, etc. But whether it will be implemented or not is not something that you can question anymore, because every single policy assures some fiat. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, very much. Thank you.
No worries. Is there any other question regarding THBT, THW, and THBT X should or would? Cool. Seeing none, we're going to go on to the next one. Niharika, are you here?
Hi, yes.
Yes, take over, please.
Hmm. Just a second. Alright, am I audible?
Yes, perfectly.
Hmm. Cool. Hi guys, I am Niharika. I will be taking up this house supports or this house opposes X motion. Now, next slide, please. Understand that this is a value judgment motion, which means that you need to come up and evaluate as to what exactly you're supporting or opposing. Now, how the Berkya had mentioned about the this house would motion, that there is a policy that comes up with it, right? There is no fiat in this case. That means that neither the gov nor the op has any sort of power initially. You do not have. Sorry, just a second. Uh-huh. You do not have to actually come up and propose a model, which means that you do not come and give a policy, right? Okay, this house supports. This house supports X. You do not come up and explain how, like, what exactly is going to happen. You do not propose a model. You do not ask questions like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Who does this? How is it going to happen? And how are you going to handle this? Right? There, you don't actually fill the loopholes as to what is happening. What you actually do though. Next slide. Yes, you're going to come up and evaluate what is this, what the X is, right? The government teams, the burden of the government team is to come up and argue that whatever the X is, they're in fully support of it, and the opposition argues that okay, X should not be supported in this way. Right. You come up and you talk about the effects and the impacts that are going to happen on the stakeholders or the society. Now, the stakeholders could be a country, it could be economy, it could be anything. You need to talk about the effects and impacts on the stakeholders when you actively actually start supporting or opposing this. You talk about how exactly you're going to support it, right? It may be, politically, you probably like give some financial support to it and support to the whatever the X is, and then evaluate the impacts. Next slide, please. So, for example, let's take the motion at hand that this house supports US involvement in the Middle East. You don't talk about how exactly US is going to be involved in a certain company in a certain country, sorry, and what steps are they going to take. You talk about what will happen when this involvement actually does indeed happen, right? So government teams, what their burden is to fulfill in this motion is that they must argue that the US involvement is just positive in totality, right? Without actually picking and choosing which aspects of this motion, without actually cherry picking some aspects of the motion that they're supporting. Now, the second thing is that you need to fully either support it or fully disagree with it. What this means is that there will be times when the opposition makes a claim that might be factually correct, or you actually cannot rebut it. In this sort of in this condition, what you do is that you don't just simply exclude the bad outcomes. You're going to have to prove to the adjudicator that okay, sure, even if these flaws exist in my side of the world, uh, it still deserves, X still deserves support, since you're completely supporting it. Even if this harm exists in my side of the world, the positive impact of me supporting this will actually outweigh the negative impacts. Um, I hope that's clear. Next slide, please. Okay, there are two major subtypes of these. That is, this house supports the rise of X, and this supports or opposes, or and the second is this house supports or opposes the narrative of X. Now, what does the rise of X means? It means that you specifically focus on growth, That means is okay, let's take an example that this house supports the rise of women in male dominant fields. What you do here is the house is not just stating that okay, women should exist in these fields, but actually like explicitly support the fact that okay, now there is in the future there is going to be increased participation of the women in male dominant fields. You talk about, you know, the debate evaluates the impacts of the increase. That means okay, there will be now more increased gender equality. There's going to be a major shift between, you know, traditional power structures. There are going to be more women in authority compared to the present. And then the opposition might argue ki, okay, there's going to be much more backlash that is going to happen, and there's going to be more structural challenges that, you know, an organization or a company might face. So this focus is on the change over time and its consequences, not just specifically women in male dominant fields. um, the debate is then just centered around, you know, it being beneficial overall. Next, yes. Moving on, the second type is this house supports the narrative of X. Now, what does narrative mean? Is basically just a widespread belief of something. So, if I say this house supports the narrative of getting married at 20, then that means that you're trying to you imply that there's a major population of the world that actually believes that getting married at 20 is great. Now when you support this narrative, what means is that you do okay, you're not supporting that women should, you know, just a person should get married at 20. You're supporting the fact that okay, now so many people believe that women or just people should get married at 20, and because of this belief the opposition might argue that okay, what if someone does want to, you know, or what if someone does not want to get married at 20, they want to actually start exploring life and things like that. Then but then because of this narrative, the existence of this narrative, there's going to be some sort there like this amount of peer pressure that everyone believes that you're supposed to be married at 20 but you're going against it. So that is what the opposition would like probably come up and argue. That is pretty much it. Does anyone have any doubts? Any regarding, you know, so you know, rise or narrative or anything? All right.
Right. I mean, until now, even if you have doubts regarding like previous motion burdens that we just discussed, please go ahead and like raise your hand. We'll address it at any point. Or what you can do, and I think this is way more feasible, every single time you think you have some question, just put it in the chat box so that whenever we pause or whenever we finish one particular motion burden, we are then able to go ahead and like deal with your doubt immediately. Cool. Since I do not see any doubts currently either in the chat box or any raise of hands, I'll simply go ahead with the next motion, which is this house prefers. And this is interesting because there are three subdivisions that are there in a THP motion, which is a this house prefers motion. The first is this house prefers X. So you're preferring only one thing. The second is this house prefers X over Y, which means there is inherent comparison with another thing. And third, which is this house prefers a world X primarily, which is the first motion type itself in THP. It's THPX. So how do you then go ahead and deal with a motion burden like this? Government has to come and define how this new thing X works and compare it to the status quo. Because THP is inherently comparative motion, you always compare it with something, you always value harms and benefits and like debate it against something as well, right? So in this case, government needs to go ahead and define how X works and debate it and compare it against the status quo. Now who exactly then defends the status quo? That is your opposition, which means opposition operates in a paradigm that then goes ahead and explains whatever is happening in status quo and defends whatever is happening in status quo. So government goes ahead and talks about the benefits that are then occurring in this new paradigm X, or like by this new thing X, the kind of better solvency that then occurs, etc. But also opposition then goes ahead and compares it inherently to the status quo and says how the status quo is better. I think a really good example for you to understand how THP X works is THP see Rahul Gandhi as the Prime Minister of India. So this house prefers Rahul Gandhi as the Prime Minister of India, Rahul Gandhi being the thing X over here. So how do you then go ahead and like mechanize your argument or mechanize your case in itself? Government needs to like come ahead and tell you why Rahul Gandhi is probably a better choice for prime minister that you could possibly have for current day India, which means present India with its socio-economic conditions, with its like political condition, etc. in itself is used as a comparison to like show how Rahul Gandhi is probably going to do better, which means government needs to come here and frame how exactly Rahul Gandhi might just come and help current India out, which means you are not really going ahead and like using any other like comparative basis other than the status quo. I think then opposition can come and tell you regarding like the current socio-economic condition, etc., but the current political stability that is there, etc., etc. Like they have to go ahead and compare why Rahul Gandhi becoming the prime minister will not be beneficial in this particular paradigm, which means India probably won't be doing as good. India probably won't be able to like go ahead and like sustain whatever development they're having, etc., etc. Also, yeah, no political preferences whatsoever. This is just, I think, the easiest way for you people to understand how exactly THPX works, which means X is constantly being compared to the status quo itself. So, Gov supports X and opposition supports status quo. That's inherently how it works. The second motion type, and I think this is easier to understand, that is THP X over Y. So you have these two constraints or two variables that are there, right? So government bench operates by defining how this X works. What are its benefits? How does it solve the current problems that might be created by Y? Which means opposition now has a burden to go ahead and define how Y works in their paradigm, because opposition does not inherently have to defend status quo anymore, which means Y is not a status quo product. Y is something else that you have to defend, which means like you have to like compare and analyze between X and Y constantly as government and opposition, and tell me like where you have more benefit, where you have more harm, where do you have better like solvency, etc. Sure, for the example, I chose this house prefers Debarkya over Sanjeev. I think then you can like come and compare Debarkya with Sanjeev directly. So you're not comparing Debarkya with like every other guy out there or like every other KIIT student out there. You're comparing him with Sanjeev in particular, which means like there is no status quo understanding of it whatsoever. Like you're comparing the barcode with Sanjeev. So these are two entities individually in isolation that you're comparing. So you can possibly ask government bench go ahead and say like how the bargo possibly gives you a lot of treats, he probably feeds you a lot of cheesecakes, he like goes ahead and like he's very sweet, he tells you how to do your homework, etc. etc. I think then you can possibly like talk about how you possibly feel as a friend to Debarko, but also if you're in like contact with Debarko, etc., what are the inherent benefits or what are the inherent good things that Debarko does? I think then on opposition bench, people can come and say, hey, but Sanjeev is like a very fun guy. He like probably goes ahead and makes sessions interesting for you. He will ensure you never get bored, which means if you're a part of Chronicles, you might just prefer Sanjeev more because he can be one of the reasons that you're coming to sessions in the first place and taking workshops, which means there are different like paradigms, so there are different benefits and harms to both Debargo or Sanjeev. Then what do? Then you should go ahead and weigh it out. So government has to weigh out why getting treats from Debargo is probably better than Sanjeev making sessions interesting, and vice versa on opposition. So you have to go ahead and compare two entities and understand how one is better than the other, and how that like one thing, let's say if it's curve, how Debarko is absolutely better than Sanjeev or absolutely better like yes, of course Sanjeev is the opposition, either way, or how like things are absolutely better off and giving you more output, utility, solvency, etc. So like what are these terms that I'm using? These are all metrics, or these are all ways that you can go ahead and weigh things out and see what works better, right? um the third type, and I think this is my favorite type of THP motions, that there's like this house prefers a world X. Now, this is particularly interesting because you have a lot more freedom as government, which means you can go ahead and you can build a new world from t equal to 0. I think we've done enough physics like sums and questions to understand that when you're doing something from t equal to 0, you're forming things from the very beginning, which means this is where you're generating things from. So on government, you go ahead and talk about how this concept X comes into existence. How did it come into existence? What was the premise for it coming into existence? And why is this particular way of it existing in the world, or why is like this particular way of it manifesting the most likely thing to happen? And then you go ahead and tell the judge or tell the adjudicator why this is good, which means why is the establishment of X in the way that we are talking about and in the mechanized way that we told you inherently better. What do you do then on opposition? On opposition, you do similar things to like the first THP type, which is you defend your status quo and you compare it to the world that the government has shown you and tell us why it is inherently better, which means comparison does not exist with just X or the harms and benefits that X is giving you, but the kind of effect that X has over the world in the way that the government bench has characterized it, which means it is not an isolated effect of X, it is an entire cohesive effect of how X is going ahead and ensuring how things are working in that particular world. How exactly is the premise working, and why is it more likely for X to even occur in the first place? So that is what opposition is like, comparing their status quo to. Cool. So sometimes what happens is that because there is a little bit more burden on government here, because you have to go ahead and define a world from t equal to 0 with X being something that has come into existence. What if they don't do their job well? What if you're in a debate and you see the government has not defined this particular world? Because then, as opposition, you don't have anything to go ahead and compare your status quo to. You do something very simple, you call them out. And it's important in every single debate to call other teams out if they don't go ahead and fulfill their burdens. You get like major brownie points from the judge right then and there. Which means if I am opposition and I see the government has not done a fair enough job of defining their world from t equal to 0, I will probably say something like, panel, please note that government has not done their job and has not defined the world from t equal to 0 and shown you how X works, but I will do their job for them and tell you how exactly X possibly operates in a world. And then you go give them one or two points regarding how you imagine X to work in their world, which is in government world. And then you use the imaginative, like, output that you just presented to compare it to the status quo, which means under no circumstance should your speech lack comparison with the world consisting of X. So don't just compare it to X, make a world and then compare that to status quo. Trust me, you're like more likely to win a debate the moment you do that. So the example that I took for this is this house prefers a world where matriarchy is the dominant narrative. I think then I have to go ahead and like say something like, how exactly did matriarchy even come into existence? So now I'm going to t equal to 0. I'm talking about how matriarchy probably came into existence once people realized that like feminism is something that's important, or people realize that there can be like an equal amount of power or status or even like some amount of social mobility that can be carried or that can be controlled by women in itself, which means now you go ahead and like build this imaginative different world where I have proved to you that like women have social power, women have like some amount of traction, etc. I think then I go ahead and tell them that women are probably better placed to make better communities, which means since women are able to go out and work, but also they are known as people who are more emotionally cognizant, etc., you can possibly go ahead and argue that this community is more well connected together. So it's entrenched together. There is lesser amount of like friction that is there in the community. So like, do you get what I'm doing? I'm building a world which is inherently imaginative, but I'm also justifying why I think that world has these characteristics. So the characteristic of a community being very like, socially cohesive together is coming from the fact that I tell you that hey, women are leaders in matriarchy, which means they are emotionally intelligent by nature, but also the way that they grow up in society, which means everyone is probably more like emotionally and socially and like socially cognizant of each other. So there is less friction that's happening in itself. So like that is how you go ahead and you build cases from t equal to 0. Right, that is it for this house prefers. Before Sanjeev goes ahead and tells you why exactly he's the best actor and you should obviously do policy motions, any questions? Right, I see one in chat, which is a question about fiat. Like, if a motion has negative feasibility, then how does the op question that? Cool. So, I think instead of questioning the inherent feasibility of the motion, what you question then is the impact that that particular policy or that particular framework has on the debate, which means government comes and says something that is extremely like unfeasible or makes no sense. Then you go ahead and you define as opposition what is the impact of the policy that government just came and told me, and then you compare the impact of that and say why that is bad because it has three major harms, or why that is not going to work because it affects the society badly, etc. So you question the impact, you can't question the existence of the policy. So you can do an analysis of how exactly it impacts solvency, and I just realized I haven't really explained solvency out to you. Every single motion or every single paradigm will have certain problems. It is up to you in the debate to go ahead and show how you solve these particular problems one by one. So, if you are able to go ahead and claim that government paradigm has three problems and this policy does not go ahead and solve those problems anyway, but I, as the opposition, have given you this counter policy which solves all three of those problems, you can inherently go ahead and claim your policy is better than the government, but also the solvency or your ability to go ahead and solve those issues is way more on your side. That is inherently how a debate functions. You can use the same metric of solvency in THB, but also every single motion type. You just need to know how to frame things. Right, Sanjeev, take over, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, perfectly so.
Yeah. So now we will be focusing upon this house as, and probably this is the fun motion that like this burden has. And again, starting with actor motions, these are certain kind of debate motions that ask teams to argue from a perspective of a certain individual or a certain group as an actor. These motion usually takes forms such as this house as a certain kind of actor would do a certain kind of action. And again, you have to debate on a very simple fact that why this particular actor has a major incentive to just go ahead and do that kind of action. And again, second, that this house believes that this certain actor is in the best interest of the particular action in itself, right? And again, these debates are not arguing what it is like best for the world itself, but again, as said before, we are just focusing upon the perspective of a specific individual or a certain kind of group in itself, right? And again, it's mainly about what an actor should do or considering who they are in the first place, right? Because again, at the end of the day, it is a perspective based actor motion. And again, both government and opposition must argue exclusively from a particular actor's point of view and nothing else, because again it does not come at majority at a level of certain kind of general statements about what is best for the world, but again at the end we have to cater to that particular actor. And again, arguments should reflect a certain kind of actor's knowledge, its values, its moral beliefs, responsibilities, and a long term interest in the first place. And again, even these motions provides a hypothetical character, like for example that you as an 18-year-old something would do this. This is also counted as actor motion. Like for example, another example can be like Mr. Jones is this kind of person, and again it is in the best interest of him to do and go ahead and do this kind of things. These kinds of motion are also accounted as this house as an actor motion itself. And again, this the decision is framed as one that actor must take. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, now it's about team burdens, right? And government must clearly define who the actor is, what are their roles, what are their responsibilities, limitation, and worldview in itself that is generally going to cater to their particular action. Again, explain. We have to explain what is the actor interest. They can be maybe practical, based upon security, success, stability, or certain kind of efficiency in the first place. Or again, we can just debate on a certain factor that these actors' interest may rely on their own moral and principle values like duty, care, justice, responsibility, yada yada yada, right? And again, you have to prove that the proposed action best serves on those particular interests, because again, you show why these choices align with the actor's overall well-being. So this is some kind of a basic framework that the government can follow and just simply opt into in their own particular characterization. And again, what opposition burden lies, right? What opposition can simply do is that they can accept that actor's best interest is this, but argue that the action simply falls if you're not able to achieve them, or even if you go ahead and try to even achieve them. Again, they can challenge the government's understanding of the actor's interest and explain that what the actor actually values and why refusing the motion better serves those values in the first place. Meaning, now you can just simply tell that, oh, this is not what the actor's major interest simply lies in, even if we go ahead and do this. But instead, if we just flip the whole argument to our side, this lies in the best interest of the particular actor. Now you can simply cater to the actor, or you can just simply build your case at a very majority good level when you just simply try to define character as a whole, that what decision will be he will be taking to go ahead and make that kind of decision in the first place. Again, what an actor should do is not something what the actor is likely to do, because again, it's mostly upon his past behavior or this public statement that helps him to explain that perspective. But it does not limit that the actor is ought to do in the first place. And again, you cannot simply go ahead and say that, oh, these particular actors are purely selfish in the first place, because again, you will be mostly catering to their to them and not the world itself. Meaning, even if you say that prioritizing an actor's perspective does not mean ignoring morality, because again, in certain kind of info slide, it will be already given that, oh, this what actor looks like, right? Meaning that he might have more moral capacity, more moral beliefs in the first place. Again, you know. Most actors hold ethical beliefs and may act against short-term self-interest to uphold those particular kind of principles in the first place, right? And again, it is mostly upon that what is this pain or this pleasure is not absolute in this particular actors. Meaning, again, minimizing or maximizing happiness must be way upon these actors other values, like even if he might have certain kind of dignity, duty, or long-term responsibility in the first place. Can we move to the next slide? Aditya, yeah. So yeah, taking an example that this house as parent would send their child to boarding school. Now we can simply just look on a very simple fact or a basic burden that it's an actor motion, because in this kind of motion you are simply acting as a parent. And again, how this debate would generally simply work, right? On a very simple metric that, oh, now you are a parent, now your only burden is to tell that what this parental perspective simply looks like in government's point of view, or like in general opposition point of view itself, right? Because again, identify parental interest is simply like that's given. Like you can build a simple case that it's mostly upon child's long-term success, structured upbringing, and independence and discipline and whatnot, right? Again, you have to show how these boarding schools fulfill these interests better than a certain kind of alternatives that the op might try to push in the first place. Now what op's case can be, it can be very simple, right? You can either argue that boarding schools would simply somehow fail to meet these interests in the first place. For example, like there will be emotional distancing between parents and students. There will be lack of care, because again, it's after all, it's like a certain kind of boarding school. And again, you can either argue that the parents might have a different priorities, such as emotional bonding or certain kind of daily guidance in the first place, which are better served by non-boarding education. You can move on to the next slide. Yeah, covered it. You can move to the next slide. Yeah, so taking example of another actor motion is that you are it's like an info slide that's given, right? You are an 18-year-old individual who has found a way to fix all the plot holes of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You do not know how the audience will react. So at the end of the day, you need to have a certain kind of consideration with regards to other audience and their backlash that they might face, right? So the motion reads, this house would fix the MCU. Now, as an actor, you are simply 18-year-old, and it's again a THW motion, meaning you have to push a certain kind of framework that how you will be going ahead and eventually fixing MCU in the first place, right? The explanation is very simple, right? You are a very young individual with a limited certainty about outcomes, and again, teams must consider there is certain kind of risk tolerance with because again, after all, you are an 18-year-old. Again, you might have certain kind of fear of backlash. Why? Because again, it's already given in the info slide that you do not know how the audience will react. And again, you have moral responsibility to fans because again, fans have certain kind of expectations from you when you're fixing these plot holes in the first place, right? So you have to take consideration of everything, and again you have to tell that why this thing becomes very in the best interest of this 18-year-old to just go ahead and just provide a certain kind of framework as a government that, oh, you will be fixing all the plot holes in the MCU, right? And again, the opposition can simply come and tell that, oh, why fixing plot holes might become bad, or what is the likelihood on which you can face certain kind of backlash, or you will be ruining MCU as a whole, right? Again, the argument must explain why fixing or not fixing these particular MCU plot holes aligns with the individual interest and certain kind of values. So it's a very fun type of motion. You can just hypothetically, argue upon a certain kind of, characterization upon your own particular interest. So that's it from my side. Any questions? Yeah, scene man. Thank you.
House to expert. I think it's my favorite, anyways. Right. This has to get right. So we're inherently regretting this X thing that is happening, which means you are regretting the existence of X, and you think as government that the world would have been a better place without X existing in the first place. Which means you know that X has already occurred, and you know that X has already had certain harms and benefits. So you have what we call the benefit of hindsight. So you're already informed as to how the X thing is working. So you know what to regret, you know which harms to regret, you know what benefits X has already generated in the current status quo. So this is your status quo, and you're operating on some kind of hindsight understanding. So you know what has happened. Now, what do? THR motions, which is this House regrets motions, inherently places a burden on government to provide what we call a counterfactual. A counterfactual is very easy to do. It's basically you go ahead and it's actually difficult to do, but once you realize how counterfactuals operate, you'll enjoy doing it, and I think that makes it easier for you. So a counterfactual is something that occurs when that X thing never happens. So let's say this X thing has happened. So imagine that you're going back in time and you're deleting the existence of X. So X never occurs in the first place. And then you go ahead and you frame this new thing Y, and you go ahead and tell me how this alternate world developed with Y being in existence. And you also prove the likelihood of this alternate world and tell me why it is the most likely thing to happen and how exactly it solves those harms that X was already generating in status quo. So again, burden. Burden is gov presents a counterfactual, tells you how this new particular thing whose likelihood you have proved in the counterfactual is way better because it eliminates certain harms or eliminates certain disadvantages that X has already incurred in status quo. Burden on opposition is you go ahead and you defend status quo, you compare it to the likelihood of y thing occurring that government tells you in their counterfactual, but also you defend the status quo and show how the benefits of x far outweigh the kind of harms that government is describing to you that x has already like made happen in society. I think it's easier for you to understand counterfactual if I do it with an example, which means if I take the example of this house regrets the culture of fearing death, you're not debating the harms or benefits of death, which means this house supports the culture of fearing death or this house opposes the culture of fearing death is a harms versus benefits debate. But in this house regrets, you're regretting that culture of fearing death even happening in the first place, which means you're telling me that like as like if you are gov and you go in and you present a counterfactual, in that counterfactual you're telling me if this culture of fearing death never happened, if it never existed, if it like never existed, then what would happen? And this new thing that happens, its likelihood has to be proven. So, what do you go ahead and talk about? You talk about what exactly led to the existence of this like culture of fearing death and status quo even happening. You go back and you delete the concept of fearing death from your world on government, and you give the likelihood of this new thing why occurring. And then you have to go ahead and like prove why this new thing occurring is better and why it deals with the harms that X produces on status quo, and you do a comparative analysis. I think you can like say a lot of things for this. You can say something like the culture of fearing death probably like makes you go ahead and like believe that there is this like time that is fixed, which means you have fixed time and you go ahead and you die someday, and you also have to like provide some sort of a utility, which means there is already some sort of a narrative in society that tells you you as an individual in society need to generate good, you need to generate some output, which means every single day you're going ahead and you're trying to generate some sort of output, and this culture of fearing death makes you go ahead and like give you these things that you need to achieve, which means you possibly have to get married by your 30, you possibly have to earn a lot of money by your 45. So there is this ticking time bomb on your hand in opposition side. I think in government you can come ahead and like go ahead and tell me that because the concept of generating output and utility exists, but the fact that culture of fearing death is like no longer there on your side of the world, you possibly go ahead and you maximize every single day, which means output does not have a timeline anymore because you don't have the concept of death like deciding how much time you have in this particular life or in this particular world. Now every single day needs to be maximized to the most. So you possibly have concepts of like carpe diem, which is live your current day to the fullest. So the amount of like let's say output that everyone is putting forward in this society is way more than the output that people are like putting forward in opposition. But also because you don't have any sort of like a ticking time bomb associated with you anymore, you can go ahead and pursue your passions and pursue it to the best particular level that you absolutely can, which means if I like want to become an actor, I go ahead and I invest a lot of my time into becoming an actor, and I like ensure that I'm able to like get some sort of output out of it, which means it's easier for me to pursue things without the like crushing pressure of needing to like do things by a particular timeline. I think that is what a counterfactual looks like, and you say why it makes sense, why it's more likely. Like this is a very like small understanding of how a counterfactual looks like or how it operates. You will understand this way more in mocks, but also in case prep sessions. um that is it for this house regrets and also motion burdens. They bargo, you can like go ahead and like stop recording. Right. If any